Welcome to the Social Engineer Podcast, the Human Element Series, episode 165. I'm Chris Hadnaghi, founder and CEO of Social Engineer LLC, social-engineer.org, and the Innocent Lives Foundation. And I've been hosting this podcast since way back in 2009. This episode is sponsored by Social-Engineer LLC. We are a trusted information security provider. You know it. Come on, we can see ransomware, malware, all sorts of human-based attacks going on in companies every day. We focus on helping companies learn how to defend against those and being able to fight against malicious attacks by strengthening their human network. You can check out more on social-engineer.com. And if you're interested in the topic of psychology or social engineering or anything like that, we have a Slack channel. You can get the link down in the show notes, and you can join over 1,000 people in there talking each and every day about everything to do with security, as well as psychology, pretexting, framing. There's even a job board on there. Of course, we want to give a big shout out to Clutch. You can check them out on pro-rock.com since they are the opening music for us, and we're big fans. And last but not least, please check out innocentlivesfoundation.org. I'm so proud of my team there. They are working hard to help save children from the horrors of child abuse, working closely with law enforcement around the globe to find people who are creating child abuse material. So you can check out the work that we're doing at innocentlivesfoundation.org. Now, let me introduce my guest. I'm really excited about this one because, as you know, we talk about leadership a lot on this podcast. So finding someone who specialized in a career in this is really exciting for us. So I'm really happy to introduce Dr. Camille Preston. She's the CEO and founder of AIM Leadership. Since she found AIM Leadership in 2004, so it's been around for a while, she's worked with leaders across the sectors all over the capital stack. She's a business psychologist, which brings research and insights from psychology, neuroscience, and business to her work, which is really impressive when we get into that topic. She supports Fortune 500 leaders, startup founders, C-suite executives in healthcare and other types of businesses too. Camille's sweet spot, though, is helping uncover hidden barriers to increase anyone's capacity to optimize, innovate, and manage change. In addition to working as a coach and a business psychologist, Camille is an author of 2 books, a regular contributor to several established publications in business and psychology fields, and the author of a growing library of actionable resource tools. She's a lifelong challenge seeker. We'll talk about some of that. She's lived on 4 continents. I want to hear about that one. And she's worked over 6. And except for now, because of COVID, she's a world traveler. Camille, thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for our conversation today.
I am too. So let's start off with just the basics. How did you get into this? Like, what made you decide that you were going to enter the world of teaching people business psychology and leadership?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I'd answer it twofold. One, I was working with a nonprofit of police executives, police chiefs from large jurisdictions, and my very first day on the job in this national nonprofit was 9/11, which is the day that hometown security became homeland security. And all of a sudden we had police chiefs from like really big jurisdictions saying like, I never trained for this. Like, I don't know exactly what to do about this. And it was both an honor and just a privilege, and also a steep learning curve to walk beside them as they were rethinking that. That said, if my father was still alive and you asked him that question, he would probably say she started coaching when she was like 4.5 by just asking really difficult questions. I just never knew she could make so much money asking questions because I was the youngest of 3, and I guess always dialed in on kind of the human element.
That's great. But man, what a crazy time to start, though. Like your first day is the catastrophe that rocked the whole world.
Rocked the whole world. And also police chiefs, like their job was hometown security. And like a heartbeat, it became homeland security, which is actually kind of links into so many of the challenges today. We saw leaders having to pivot and learn whole new skill sets, which is exactly what we've been doing over the last 2 years. Is, first it's COVID, then it's supply chain, then it's like, where are we working? And then what is the vaccination policy? Like everybody's constantly on their toes and pivoting.
That had to be such an amazing learning curve, but also such a stressful time to learn how to do something almost brand new at a time when the world was also learning to pivot on brand new things.
I've talked about this so much. I've never thought about it from that perspective. I always just saw it as an opportunity to serve and learn beside people. And it's an interesting perspective. I saw it as a gift rather than a challenge. So maybe that tells you a little bit about my mindset.
It tells you a little bit about you. That's great. So let's talk about that. You say you have all these police chiefs. You're trying to teach them this new leadership skills. How important was building awareness and mindfulness in that journey?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, first, I wouldn't have described what I did as coaching back then. I just remember a specific police chief that I was doing a big contract with. Every time I'd come into town, he'd say, "Can we go out to dinner?" And of course, my mom was like, "I want you to get married and make grandbabies." And he was married. And I was like, "Mom, it's not like that. He's just looking for someone he can talk to and have a trusted advisor, a strategic thought partner, and show vulnerability, because when you're at the top, you're at the top." So kind of word got out, that was Minneapolis, and then Minneapolis told Seattle, and Seattle told LA. And so every time I was traveling, I was having these really long dinners, which were really the beginning of coaching conversations and strategic thought partnerships. So that's kind of how it started. And then I left that organization and started my company, just because what I realized is there are so many amazing people in the world who are doing such amazing work. But until recently, most people didn't get skills about self-awareness, skills about learning who they are. I joke that I had 26 years of formal education and exactly 45 minutes on what is a good life. Right? So no one teaches you that type of thing. Yeah. The mindfulness, the self-awareness was always there, but the mindfulness is probably, I was not doing that with the police chiefs back then, but it was definitely self-awareness.
So how do you build mindfulness?
There's a great joke. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb?
I don't know, actually.
One, but the light bulb has to want to change. It's stupid, right?
Okay, it is, but fitting.
But
right?
fitting. And so, you can't build mindfulness unless that's an internal choice, right? You can give people a lot of feedback and they might not accept it, they might not learn. But once someone realizes that self-awareness is at the cornerstone of effective leadership, all of a sudden you've cracked a door of possibility. There's some fabulous wide-ranging research on emotional intelligence, and different researchers say different things, but they say that your cognitive intelligence, your IQ, your cognitive capacity is between 4 and 20% of your success as a leader. The rest is emotional intelligence, which is how well do you know yourself? How well do you adapt yourself in different settings? How well can you engage with other folks? And so when you present leaders with that type of research, they're like, "Oh, I gotta went to school and I have all the knowledge. I gotta get that soft skills up." And it starts from the inside out, if that makes sense.
It does. And it's I never heard that statistic. So that's fascinating, because you always would think that the smarter you are, the easier it will be to be successful. But it makes logical sense, really, to say that the higher your EQ, the better you'll be in business, because that's really what makes business, right? Is the way we communicate.
Yeah. There's a saying, and the person who's often quoted for it isn't the author of it, but they say people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, which is really about why that connectiveness happens. Yeah. Can I geek for one more moment?
Please.
We spend so much of our life building what we call horizontal skills, putting in new tools. I'm going to learn Excel. I'm going to understand P&Ls. I'm going to learn these new skills. And that's horizontal. It's like putting new tools in your tool belt. The work that I do is really focused on what I call vertical development. What in the field of adult development we think about is growing yourself. So if horizontal is putting more water into your existing cup, vertical development is growing a bigger cup. And that's what leaders need in this day and age. The leaders that had bigger cups, when it got turbulent, less water spilled out. And so mindfulness and self-awareness are both gateways into how do I build a bigger cup? How do I grow myself so I can manage complexity and uncertainty and variety and pretty much everything we've been dealing with for the last 2 years.
That's a fascinating. You can geek out all you want, because that was amazing. I really love the idea of the self-awareness and mindfulness being the avenues to those things. So you said you can't really be taught or build self-awareness or mindfulness. Can you build self-awareness?
You can learn mindfulness and you can develop self-awareness, but someone can't say, you can't impose.
I'm going to teach it to you.
Choice. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can give someone feedback, right? But they might not hear it. So yes, you can build awareness, and there's 3 gateways to growing vertical. I actually heard there's a 4th one introduced last week, but one is genuine heat. So putting yourself in really challenging experiences. And the research is really clear that 66% of leadership comes from navigating adversity, difficult situations, stretch positions, having low resources. It's not necessarily from like going to a course or what have you. The work I often do is bring the leadership theory to support the difficulties or what people are navigating. So kind of stacking them together. So the first way we grow ourselves is genuine heat, like being put in like backside on the line. You have to deliver, kind of showing up with these police chiefs and like having to figure out what happened.
9/11.
9/11, exactly. Yeah. The second way is what they call colliding perspectives. How do you bring 2 different ideas together and like have the contrast, the complexity, the diversity where they don't fit? And then the third way is what they call focused reflection. So how do I find stillness in myself and step back and say, what worked, what didn't work, what did I learn? But it's often that stillness, which at least the corporate world doesn't necessarily support, right? Like we're like, go, 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 go.
Right, yeah.
How can you go some more, right?
Yeah.
The 4th one that I heard last week was, I thought was interesting, was this idea of courage. That mindfulness and awareness actually takes a lot of courage to go against the grain, slow down, try new things, experience new ways.
Yeah.
So
that makes so much sense. Yeah, it makes so much sense when you put it that way. And thinking about that stillness part, I could imagine why that takes so much courage. Is like when you do that, you're going to probably think about some things you really messed up. You're going to be thinking, oh boy, I really screwed that one up. And that's going to take a little bit of courage or humility to get through that, because nobody really likes to think about their mistakes.
Yeah, let alone like look in the mirror and being like, ooh, that didn't go so well. Like, my son actually came home sick today from school, and he was a little pisser yesterday. And I woke up this morning and I was like, wow, that wasn't quite the mom I wanted. And now I can see like, oh, he was a little under the weather. And like, I can look in the mirror and say, opportunities there.
So let's play on that. What do you do then? What do you do? So let's say you have that scenario. You say, hey, yesterday I didn't react as I should have because, I didn't see that, but now you see it. Do you do anything with that? What's the next step?
It's an interesting question because kids are actually a great model for how leaders should engage and show up. Because we think about putting scaffolding and making meaning. And so literally my son came downstairs this morning and I got down on his level and I looked him in the eye and I gave him a big hug and I said, hey, listen, last night didn't go well. It wasn't the night I wanted. And I know it wasn't the night you wanted. And I'm sorry, I got frustrated. I think we have to figure it out. We got to figure out what led us to this path. And we got to come up with some strategies, but I just want to let you know, I wasn't my best self. He's like, Mom, I was awful. Sweet little 8-year-old. But I think owning it is important, looking in the mirror, seeing our part in it. And then I'm a big believer in feeding things forward. It's why I love being a business psychologist, because we'll look backwards, but only long enough to figure out how we're going to be more effective going forward. The success leaves clues. The history, best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So you have to look back a little bit, but it's really about planning forward. So I did tell him we have a conversation that we have to have about homework and what that looks like. And we're going to problem solve that together. But I'll have to come back to you on how that goes.
But I like that. So you knew you had a problem, but you first said, I'm going to go and just kind of apologize, fix that. And now it's not, okay, we fixed it. So now let's move right to the problem solving. You say, I'm going to plan the conversation for problem solving. Is there a reason to separate those two?
Because you want to separate the person from the problem. Like he is not the problem. And you want to have the solid foundation of relationships. So that's kind of, if I were to weave this into business, Patrick Lencioni talks about the 5 dysfunctions of teams. And what he says is everybody's looking at the top of a pyramid and they're saying, what are the results? Show me the results. What are the measurable results? But at the base of that pyramid is trust. You have to be in relationship. You have to have the connectivity. You have to have trust of character, competence, and communication to be able to have healthy conflict and have a debate, to be able to have a commitment, to have accountability, to have results. So I wanted to get that foundation solid with him and then move it forward. But I wasn't like, hey, no problem, we're going to move on. I was like, we're going to talk about this.
So you say that, okay, now you just made me, boy, you're taking me down a whole path. What happens if you do something that ruins that trust? Then how do you get it back so you can do what you just said and start building?
Well, you just did a beautiful full circle to why self-awareness is so important, right? Because you have to understand how your behaviors impact other people to be able to see that. Trust is one of the things that we cover early on in our leadership courses. It's core to our coaching work. It's core to any of our team interventions, because so often there are micro breaches of trust that happen. People have failures to manage time, or failures to manage commitments, or not communicating information. And they're all like small things, like easy to look, turn a blind eye to, but they stack over time. And so self-awareness about what builds trust and breaks trust is really important to navigate going forward. And I think one of the greatest challenges we are going to face is, how are we building this trust and these relationships in a world where we don't see people face to face as much? And how do we create that authenticity and connectivity? You gotta have self-awareness.
And how have you felt like meetings like this, where we're over a screen? You can only see not even half of me. We're two-dimensional. Like how has that affected this ability to build trust and good communications?
Oh, that's like would need like a couple hours for that. And it's a great question. One of the resources that we have is on virtual authenticity. And the idea there is, how do you create authentic connections with people that you don't necessarily know, you can't necessarily connect with? And a lot of it starts with being able to share of yourself, right? Like I told you a couple quirks in my day when we were waiting to jumpstart, and like, you're like, oh, I kind of get a sense of her. She's like, you probably were like, she's like this person, or she's like that person. But then you felt like you knew me, navigating going forward. So again, self-awareness, knowing yourself, sharing of yourself, and then being able to kind of stack up upon that and build rapport.
So now, what about like we're out in public, maybe we're not as much, but we're wearing masks. How is that? Because my whole life involved meeting people, shaking their hand. Now I'm wearing a mask and I meet you and I'm like, oh wait, do I offer my hand, or don't I? I don't know what to do anymore. So how has that affected our ability as leaders, or even building trusting relationships?
Yeah, it's taken away so many facial cues, right? Like there's so much that people can't see, and you're all of a sudden you're looking at just people's eyes and calibrating. I think two things. It's made Zoom meetings more palatable, because at least you can see someone's face is one thing. The second thing about, with masks, we can't see as much, but on Zoom, we're actually much closer to people than we think. Like we're seeing people's full face and we're looking at people straight on. Whereas in a board meeting, we might have people at an angle. It also leads to a different type of fatigue. People are exhausted. Like after, like there's at no point are you going to be like, right? Like you're smiling and you're nodding and you're engaged. So I think that we haven't really figured out kind of the long-term implications. But I will say, as a mom of two little people, I have a 6 and an 8-year-old. It's interesting. My daughter has never been in her school without a mask. She's, she's like, which is kind of crazy.
That is. Yeah. It's like I was totally different, but you made me think of this. Is my daughter was not raised with anything but digital cameras.
Yeah.
Right. So she didn't even know. Like the first time she saw a roll of film, because I have an old camera, she was like, "What is this?" And I'm like, "This is film. This is how you used to take pictures, And then she's like, "How does it work?" Right. And then when I showed her, and she's like, "So where does the picture come?" And I'm like, "It comes from the store after you develop it." She goes, "You have to wait?" She goes, "Oh, that's so boring." Right. Exactly. And I'm thinking, wow, but now this generation, you're right. They're not going to know, like, not wearing a mask. This is just going to be the way they grow up.
Yeah, it's going to be very different. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very different. But also they have a lot of skills that they've adapted, right? There's some resilience to it. So I think the jury's out. I think the kids that will have I think the real data will come for newborns, right? There's so much that happens in that early 6-9 months about reading faces, and they can't see faces, they just see contrast. So I think that's going to be telling. And also younger kids that didn't have stimulus in their early childhood. So I think we're going to, this is
we'll have to wait and see, but yes,
like the mental health pandemic is going to be, we're looking down the line on that one. That's going to be a
every therapist I talk to, they are book solid. And there's if you try finding a therapist if you don't have one, it is almost impossible. Yeah,
I read a statistic this morning that 13% of clinicians are leaving their job, and only 10% are able to be replaced. So if you think year by year where you're losing 3% of the workforce, and I do a lot of work with hospitals, and that's another crisis we're facing.
So are they leaving because it's just the mental fatigue on them?
There's the mental fatigue, there's the physical stress, there's the emotional exhaustion, the sentiment like, why would I put my life on the line and you can't be bothered to wear a mask or get a shot? Like there's a lot of cognitive dissonance for a lot of healthcare providers. And then a lot of people have had this what really matters in life kind of awakening. So, we're seeing the Great Resignation. I personally think the Great Resignation is a reflection on leadership too. I have one client that I worked with for a year during COVID, and he lost both his parents during the year. He lost his father to COVID and early in 2020, and then he lost his mother. And he's in a sector that has incredible turnover, and he has the lowest turnover in the history of the company right now.
Wow.
And I think it's 100% a reflection of his leadership.
So was he what did he do that was different? What was his secret?
He invested in people, he invested in the relationship, and he invested in a lot of authenticity, speaking truth to power, calling it as it is, prioritizing, helping people balance how they took care of their family and how they showed up at work and how they were in integrity with their colleagues. And he created a space where people could win across all three of those. Interestingly, he also did a lot of learning about self-awareness and mindfulness, right? Finding that stillness. But can I go down another little hole here?
Please. It's always fascinating when you do. So please.
One of the things that I'm really present to is, as a society, we've over-indexed on heads. So if you can imagine a stick figure, our worlds were like huge heads on tiny little stick figure bodies, because we spent all our time and invested in our heads. And then I lived in Africa for a while, working for the State Department before I went and did my doctorate. And I used to think of Africa as just huge hearts with little heads and little arms, just big walking hearts. And now I think we're moving into this place where people are saying, I need to integrate my head with my heart, kind of the mindfulness, the self-awareness, the values, with my body, which is the well-being and the wellness. And when we integrate all of those, we actually open up a whole new set of awareness. We have a whole new way of knowing that is not just cognitive, but it's an integrated sense of whether you call it intuition or wisdom or there's lots of different ways to describe it. But I think that is one of the things that is most exciting coming out of this is that we're starting to see much more integration as a result of the awareness and the mindfulness and the complexity.
What was it about Africa that made you say that they were all heart?
I think it's an overgeneralization. I think it's a simplification, but I think I was present to how much they lived in the moment and lived in relationship and were so connected, so woven together. I remember, must have been my 22nd birthday. I went to Uganda, and I happened to be in an area of Uganda that was up in there, the Rwenzori Mountains, and Uganda had gone through a huge revolution, and they had a very life expectancy was 32 or 34. In this village, it was even lower. There was a huge AIDS epidemic going on in that part of community, and they just lived, man. Like they were like, hey, you don't know what's going to happen. So like we lived here and now fully. And, obviously we want to live past, I'm past 34, right?
Yes.
But I do think there is something to be learned about being able to shut down the shoulds and the I gotta do's and the kind of pressures and the being here now. And I think COVID's helped that. I think self-awareness helps that. And I think mindfulness definitely is a gateway there.
Yeah, I was curious just because my wife is originally born in Thailand. So we went back and visited her family, and she was from a northern mountainous area, Chiang Rai in Thailand. And her family that's there, they've just the way you describe them is they live for the day, but they're connected with each other. They may be very poor, but they don't know it. So they don't care. They have enough to go and they sell this vegetable they grew, and then they buy some meat and they keep some vegetable, and that's what they cook for the day. And they eat around together and they sing songs and they just are together. Yeah. And it felt so refreshing going there and being with them and being in a place where it wasn't about your bank account. It wasn't about your cell phone. It wasn't about what's on TV tonight. It was just being there. And it was, we came back like, wow, that's life. Like people would go, that's the third world. And it's like, no, that was more than first world. That was like first plus world. They lived and they enjoyed every second of it. And they were happy. They called them the land of smiles because they were always smiling and happy. And it's like, wow, this is amazing. I was curious what you said about Africa.
Having been to Chiang Rai, they have I remember the light festivals, some of these lanterns that were just exquisite. And then also the Thai yoga, which is like, I always thought of it as like a Thai massage. I always thought of it as passive yoga, but that's an incredible practice of getting in the body, right?
Yes.
There's the physical touch of it. And like, yeah. So it is interesting. They say, there's a Harvard professor, his last name is James, says you don't actually know yourself until you leave your country of origin, which is another thing that is interesting in a world where people aren't leaving their countries of origin as much because of COVID. So.
When I was young, we didn't travel much outside the country. So when I got married and started having kids, I said one of my goals was to be able to take my family to other places to see other cultures. So I've had the privilege of bringing my kids to Thailand, to Russia, to UK, Ireland, France, like all over the globe. We went to all over the globe. We traveled to so many different countries and always tried to spend time with lots of locals, learning about the culture, seeing the museums, the churches, the art, the things, just to kind of get like, this is stuff that you'll never see where we live because nothing's that old here. Like one of our friends in the UK has a house that was built in the 1300s. Like what? It doesn't even make sense. It's like,
but that's also you're building your kids' awareness, right? Like that's a self-awareness of like where they can fit in the continuum of time. So brilliant learning.
Yeah, it's just interesting to hear it. And now like you're saying things and I'm like, oh, we kind of did that. And I didn't even know we were doing that, And
we had fun, right?
And we had fun doing it. Yes. And now we have all these memories from traveling. And it's nice to think of, wow, we went to Fiji. I brought my family to Fiji and we met a local family and they were Indian by descent. And they invite us into their home and we have a kava ceremony and we're eating some food. And then they're like, okay, it's nap time. And they pull out these beds and they're like, mama sits on the chair and everyone takes a nap. And you weren't asked, you just took a nap. It was time to take a nap. We're all laying there. It's like, this is so weird, but it was just this weird unit of people and we enjoyed it and it was great. And we became friends and we stay in contact. And it was just, wow, this was really, really cool.
Oh, that's awesome. What magical memories you create.
Yeah. So it's nice to hear that, and then think about, wow, this is the kind of way that people can expand their self-awareness, to be able to take in other cultures and understand how other people do things. So I think that's such a valuable lesson today. I know it's scary because traveling is not easy right now with the pandemic, but hopefully we're getting back to that.
I think there's a lot that you can learn. I think if you're intentional about what you consume in terms of media, there's a lot of just incredible science and incredible travel that it's not the same as like being there and sweating your tail off in the humidity and what have you. But there's a lot of learning that that can
You can still do it. Yes. Yeah. So listen, I know we're coming near the end. So let me ask you a few questions. If you had to pick out one or two of your people that you would consider your mentors, like you would not be here today if it wasn't for them, who would you say is your greatest mentor?
Oh, that's a tough one. I will say that I have two. Can I share two?
Yes, please.
One would be my dad. My dad was an innovator, disruptor, and just an amazingly kind, smart servant leader. And he was known for redesigning middle schools so that they were took into consideration how kids' brains developed. But he was always the person that was like the wind beneath my wings. And I remember when he was on his deathbed, I'm going to choke up when I say this. I called one of my best friends, who's an older gentleman who we actually went to Afghanistan together, Thailand together. We've traveled the world and worked together. And he actually shares my dad's birthday, which is kind of funny. Oh. And I said, listen, the hardest thing about letting go of my dad is going to be losing this source of unconditional love. And he said, what do you need? And I was like, I need you to stand in his shoes. And he's done that magnificently. Wow. But I think when you think of a mentor, it's someone who challenges you to be the best and sees what's in the best of you and holds both of that, holds all of that. So high expectations and high hopes. Yeah. And I just wish for everyone that they have someone who sees them, challenges them, and levels them up in that way. Because
what a beautiful message. Yeah. What a great story, too. Wow. You're going to make me choke up. That was a great story. It's nice to have that with your dad. You know, it's nice to have had that. That's not a lot of people may not have had that relationship with their parents. So it's nice to, and what a cool job to design middle school so it's better for learning.
Yeah. Can I share one other nugget?
Please.
I don't know why it's coming to me. When my dad was dying, I asked my son's godparents, pediatrician and an educator, I was like, how are you telling your kids that my dad's dying? And they said something along the lines of, if you keep someone in your heart and your memories, they live on. And so in a random act, I told my kids, or it was my son, I was pregnant with my daughter. I said, anytime you see the moon, granddad's watching you. And the number of times my kids have been like, hey, Mom, there's Granddad. And I'm like, oh, he's watching me. I better level up. I better be a better version of myself. But it's kind of a nice way that I feel, people say they miss their parents more as time goes on. And my dad was such a great parent that I would love for him to be here. But it's really nice to know that he's always, every night the moon rises. Yes. So every night he's around. So.
And what a cool memory for your kids, too, to be able to have that.
Sweet guy. He's a sweet guy.
Yeah. Who was your second mentor?
Well, I was going to say Bill and my dad.
So Bill was the guy that stepped in the shoes for Dad.
But let me think. I could think of I think the other... The one that's coming to mind is that police chief that kept on asking me he was asking me to be the best version of myself, which is to be his coach before I even knew what coaching was. And so that was like someone who almost called me into the profession and then like basically told everybody, call Camille. She's a great coach before I even knew what coaching was.
He helped start you, right? Yeah.
Jumpstart me. Yeah. And so I think, I think it's people who challenge you into being the better version of yourself and outside your comfort zone, a little close to terror's edge. That's where
I love it.
The magic happens.
I love it. So last thing is our listeners love to read books. So can you recommend any books that you've read that you think are just great? They could be about this topic or anything that you enjoyed.
Oh, that's a good question.
And of course, we'll put your books in the show notes too, because we want people to read those.
Thinking about the books that I'm reading, I'm reading right now the Tibetan book of the living and dying, and just because I feel like we've navigated so much adversity and complexity, and there's a lot of wisdom from alternative cultures. So that's a little bit of a morose one that I'm reading, but I love Stephen Kotler's work, and I'll have to, I'm trying to think of. I feel like I should dash over to my bedside table. The other person I would say is there's a book, Game Changers, absolutely fabulous.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to more time when my kids are a little older, although I'm not sure how that exactly happens for more reading, but
yes, I don't know.
Big podcaster too. So yeah, I look forward to it.
I like to listen a lot more because I'm always on the go. So listening is a little easier nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I will say Naomi McDougall wrote a fabulous book called The Wrong Type of Woman. And it's all about a woman who disrupted how women are perceived in the media and how one person can really disrupt how Hollywood has been navigating. And so I've really loved watching Naomi's writing because she's a producer, screenwriter, film actress, activist. So she's another person who I love listening to absolutely anything she's come up with.
That's awesome.
Naomi McDougall Jones.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to put that in the show notes also. I can't thank you enough for joining us.
It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Really fascinating. I appreciate that. And thank you all for joining us too. And you can check out all the show notes with the links to Camille's books and to her websites and things like that. And join us next month on the Human Element podcast, where we'll be joined by author and professor Vanessa Bond. And we'll see you then.